Welcome back, fintech enthusiasts and digital asset adventurers, and welcome to a journey that goes through the wild land of cryptocurrency security. Because today we're going to be diving into a tale of intrigue, cunning, and a lesson in strong vigilance. A story that unfolded with the digital corridors of WazirX, one of India's largest cryptocurrency exchanges. Now, picture this: a fortress guarded by very sophisticated multi-signature wallets, security measures that are as robust as back in the medieval days, the moat around the castles. And these wallets were meant to be impenetrable because they required multiple keys to unlock the treasures that they were holding inside it. However, unfortunately, even the strongest walls can be breached if the enemy is cunning enough. And the notorious Lazarus Group, a band of cyber criminals with a reputation that's as fearsome as the name, all the way from North Korea, were able to orchestrate a heist and exploit some of the vulnerabilities in these multi-signature wallets, which was managed by Liminal and WazirX. And they were able to secure this treasure chest, and drain it out of half of what WazirX owned at that point in time. Now, you might be asking, how did all of this happen? The attackers used, and we'll get to the explanations of this, but they used a very sophisticated method known as a delegate call exploit that was kind of, in layman's term, it was like convincing the castle guard to open the gates and let the Trojan horse in through them. And they manipulated the very system which was designed to keep them out. And through that, managed to drain $230 million of the digital assets that WazirX was managing. And while a lot has been spoken about how WazirX and Liminal handled the breach, the communication post the breach, this community podcast is not at all about that. But instead, we're going to focus on the lessons that we fintech enthusiasts can learn and improve upon from this incident. For example, we will learn about the importance of constant vigilance, having robust security audits, robust and frequent security audits, the role that user education plays in safeguarding our digital assets, and as well as think of some of the other alternatives that are there to securing our digital assets. Because in the world of cryptocurrency, where the stakes are super high and there are many such conniving players out there, we must arm ourselves with knowledge and fortify our defenses. So let's get started. But before that, some general house rules, because this is the community podcast of the Fintech Chronicler. At any point in time, if you feel that you have any contribution that you would want to make, or you even have a different opinion from what I'm saying, because all of this is frankly just research that I've done all by myself, so you guys might have a better experience, do feel free to kind of raise your hand, come up on stage, I'll pull you right up and we'll have a very fruitful discussion and learn from each other. So with that said, let's get started into understanding what really happened back there. So let's first start off with a slight technical overview of the WazirX hack. Now this WazirX hack, it was flagged off on July 18th, 2024. And it involved a very sophisticated attack or a breach of the multi-signature wallets, which was managed by Liminal's digital asset custody and wallet infrastructure. Now, this resulted in the Lazarus Group, which is supposed to be the group that's behind this hack. And the Lazarus Group is very notorious for a lot of other hacks in the past, and we won't talk about that now. But they managed to steal over $230 million of the digital assets, which was at that point in time 45% of what WazirX was handling. Now, how did they manage this? First was the vulnerabilities of the multi-signature wallets that they managed to exploit. Now, the WazirX wallets had basically 6 keys or 6 signatures that were needed to unlock any one particular wallet. 5 of them were from WazirX's end and 1 was from Liminal's end. But despite this, so until and unless everyone kind of unlocks using their signature, the wallet does not open up. But despite this, the attackers exploited the data display discrepancy between Liminal's interface and the actual transaction content. And this mismatch made sure that the attackers were able to divert the funds into the wallet that they wanted to transfer it to, which was off-chain. So that was one. Second, how was the signatures compromised? So this is where some technical analysts believe that there was a phishing and signature compromise issue that happened, where at least 2 of the signatures from WazirX and the one at Liminal must have been compromised by some phishing scam over there. Then third was the smart contract vulnerabilities, where the hackers were able to upgrade a piece of code or a smart contract onto the multi-signatures wallet And this malicious contract then executed what is known as a delegate call to alter the wallet's logic in order to enable the hackers to control where the funds in the wallet are going into. And of course, they did a lot of hopping around the chains to kind of obscure the transaction's path and avoid being detected and facilitate money laundering, or rather, in this case, digital asset laundering. By the way, all of this did not happen overnight. There was at least a timeline of 8 days when the hackers were believed to be preparing for the assault. And this involved setting up the smart contract, get the phishing attack to get the compromised keys, and also setting up various different wallet entities where they can further transfer the hacked amount into. And it was only on July 18th that these things came to light in any ways. And post-attack also, the investigations are still ongoing. So we are still talking about a story that's being developed over here. And while I don't want to comment on how it's being handled by both parties, I think we'll just carry on with, first and foremost, understanding in a very simple terms, what is it that when we talk about multi-signature wallets, what are this? Very simple. Basically, to unlock any digital wallet, you need a private key. Now, for multi-signature wallets, like what we have when we set up a company that has multiple a limited liability partnership firm, you have multiple signators, and until and unless each and every signatory has signed those contracts, the contracts cannot be physically executed. This is similar to what happens in a multi-signature wallet as well, where you need multiple parties using their private keys in order to authorize a transaction. So this kind of adds a layer of extra security, extra protection over just a single signature being required over there. Now, in the case of the WazirX hacks, there were 6 keys that were involved. 5 of them were from WazirX's end, and 1 of them was to be from Liminal's end. And of those 5 also, 2 would belong to the end customer whose account they're trying to unlock. So yes, this kind of the purpose of multi-signature wallets is that it mitigates a single point of failure. Even if one key gets compromised, you can't still access the wallets. So that brings us to the entire concept of how was it that WazirX got hacked in that case. There were a bunch of steps over there involved. First was upgrading a malicious smart contract onto the wallets. And by this, what happened is the hackers that were there managed to, into one of the wallets, they put up a piece of code or a smart contract which was meant to execute an incorrect logic or allow for incorrect logics without triggering any sort of alarms. So this enabled the attackers to drain out this is like where it comes in the final stage, where when the attackers are trying to drain out the funds without raising any flags. The second was what is known as a delegate call exploit. Now, delegate call is basically, it's again another function within this malicious contract itself, which instead of the intended payload that's to be executed, it executes a different sort of a payload. Now, if I had to, it's slightly complex, so let me try breaking it down into, how I would explain it to a 5-year-old, a 15-year-old and a 50-year-old. So, for a 5-year-old, let's say that we are a 5-year-old child and we have a magic toy box with us, and this toy box has our favorite toys, our favorite candies, and we can also conjure up, other toys as well. And your best friend also has a similar toy box, and you ask them your birthday is coming up, so you ask them to come up with something magical for you. But instead of using their own toy box, they end up using your toy box. And if they're not careful with your magic toy box, it's quite possible that instead of creating something, they may also delete or alter what you already have inside your toy box. So that's kind of what a delegate call exploit does as well. Now, if I were a 15-year-old and I had to explain a delegate call attack, so basically, it's a piece of code so you and your friend, both of you have a piece of code and your own computer where the data for that code resides in. You ask your friend to execute a part of the code at his end. But instead of your friend doing it at his end, they do it on your end, which results in your data. They use your code to execute it. So accidentally, they end up deleting or changing some very important files in your database. That is what a delegated call attack looks like. And now if I was, say, a very smart person who understood smart contracts really well and, probably 50 years of age, how would I explain a delegate call attack? So now whenever a smart contract is executed on a particular chain, instead of managing and maintaining their own storage context, they end up calling and managing the storage context of another module or another wallet. So the attacker can manipulate the payload and make it look like as if it's originating from yours or has to go into yours, whereas instead it's actually probably hitting their accounts. So that's how a delegated call attack, 3 levels of difficulty if I had to. So that was step number 2, where, after they first upgraded a smart contract, malicious smart contract, then exploited the delegate call exploit over there. The third thing was bypassing the security measures that was there at the wallet custodial services, which we just spoke about, was done by phishing and compromising the signature keys. One of which was definitely Liminal's, and at least 2 of them were WazirX's. Now the fourth thing was, how do you convince all the parties involved that the payload that you're sending is actually correct? So this was where there was a discrepancy in the interface data. And what happened here was that there was a mismatch between the payload. So they managed to manipulate the transactional payload, which tricked all the signators into believing that the final address where this payload was going into was what Liminal had already authorized, whereas Liminal had not authorized that. And this also allowed them to the fifth step, which was bypassing the whitelisting policies, because only certain wallets were whitelisted to transact using those particular sets of keys. So by kind of bypassing that whitelisting policy, they were able to transfer money into their accounts. And once this all happened in a period of 8 days, the minute they were able to crack all of these 5 steps, they rapidly started transacting to, it was like a tornado movement of money happening over there, because they were moving it to a bunch of different addresses all through the network in order to just cover up their trails and make sure that no one's able to follow and figure out where these attacks are originating or where the money is finally moving into. Now, Liminal, however, after this attack, so that's about, the brief technicalities of the attack. They said that the interface and their infrastructures were not responsible for the breach, and they said that the devices within WazirX's network must have been compromised. But despite that, they've actually carried out a decent postmortem where they had a very thorough security audit happening. They went through all the access tokens that are used within their infrastructure, not just for WazirX, but Liminal also partners with a bunch of other centralized crypto exchanges. So all of those access tokens were also inspected. They did a thorough credential management or a walkthrough of all their credentials that they have to figure out if anything else has been compromised. And they are currently, it's still work in progress, so they're still doing a lot of code and transaction audit verification and going through each and every individual logs to figure out if there is any other way that they could have detected an unusual activity or an unauthorized access attempt happening. So from this, what is it that we've actually learned from the entire WazirX incident? One of the jokes is that, centralized exchanges are not that safe. Yes, but jokes aside, I think the key question is, are there other algorithms that can actually help us to safeguard our digital wallets and secure our digital assets that we keep on those digital wallets? So there are some popular choices, like for example, Circle uses a combination of programmable wallets and multi-party computation. So how does multi-party computation wallets work? Moving on, so let's talk about how is it that multi-party computation works. So basically the private key is split into multiple encrypted shares and are distributed among several parties. Each party holds only a part of the key, and only when the entire key is combined can a transaction be authorized, and the way that they combine each other is through it's through a compute logic basically. So this means that even if you have access to a compromised key, unless you also have access to the algorithm for doing that compute logic, you can't. So it's just basically one step ahead of what a multi-signature wallet does. You need to have access to the part of the key as well as the algorithm to combine them into a whole in order to verify a transaction. Then there are, of course, off-chain wallets, which are held outside of the network or outside of the crypto exchange. And this allows for, now the thing is, an off-chain transactions basically, or off-chain wallets are basically what's held in your cold storage. But the problem is, a lot of these cold storages are not very cost effective to buy for you and me. So for people who don't have that huge a digital asset, one of the alternatives that is coming up is pooling of assets together so that it becomes a manageable chunk for you to store it on an off-chain wallet. The third thing is a programmable wallet. Again, this is also something that Circle, one of the crypto exchanges, uses, which is a layer on top of a multi-party sort of a computation logic, where you have a wallet also, and there are basically SDKs or a piece of code that you can deploy locally into your own device that uses this MPC logic in order to encrypt the data. So this means that the need for having a very expensive off-chain wallet or a digital a hardware-based cold storage is taken away, because you can use any of your devices and convert it into a programmable wallet for you. And then, yes, of course. So the last algorithm that I came up with was something, it was very recent. I just found it out today when I was doing research on the alternative encryption and safeguarding mechanisms, is what is known as a time-locked multi-signature wallet. Now, this is one step advanced from a multi-signature wallet, which also incorporates a basis of time-bound conditions for the validity of your keys. And what happens, and I found this concept very interesting, because let's say that WazirX and Liminal also had a time-locked multi-signature wallet, and the time lock meant that every wallet, every key that was there had to be rotated every day, or say every 6 hours or every 12 hours or whatever, and basically they expire. So the holder needs to refresh their tokens every time, every 6 hours. So even if a key had been compromised, say 8 days ago, when they tried attacking the system the second time, after whatever the time bound lock that was there, those hackers would not have been able to, because those signatures would have now become defunct. I found that concept very, very interesting. I think where time-locked systems actually comes into play is, the reason why time-locked systems came into play was because there are two people who need to use the wallet, and one of them, of course, you can't share keys. Sharing of keys is a big no-no anywhere. Not just between me and my dad, but between anyone. By the way, hi dad, good to see you there in the audience. But yes, what if there are two people who are using a particular wallet, and they both have what if they could have two different sets of keys? And we know that, you know what, my dad is probably going to use my account only when I'm not available, and I'm not available, say, Monday through Friday because I'm working, but my dad is available. On weekends, I can take care of it. So you can set those time restrictions so that you avoid password sharing, you avoid key sharing, you avoid having to transmit your key from person A to person B over the internet and exposing it. So all of those good stuffs is what time-locked multi-signature wallets came up for. But yes, I think if we had like a round-robin sort of a fashion of resetting your keys for a particular period of time, that could have probably avoided this attack happening on WazirX as well. But that's it from my side. I think I kind of covered all the ground that I wanted to. If you have any questions, or if you have any thoughts on the entire WazirX saga, then I would definitely urge you to come up on stage and do share it with the rest of us. Yes, Aman, good to have you on stage. How are you doing, Aman? Hi, Aman.
Good evening. I got confused. Yeah, I'm good. Kamnika, how are you?
I'm good. So, Aman, why don't you introduce yourself, and I would love to hear your opinion about the entire WazirX hack.
Yeah, so Kamnika, like I mentioned to you and some of the new folks that are there, that
yes,
basically was working on the digital side of wealth management for Morgan Stanley, right? Like settlements, statements which are sent out post execution, like it's a core processing after the settlements happen, right? In the markets, capital markets. So I basically come from that background, and then bit of credit card. I worked with American Express and Deloitte's consulting are the state pensions that happen in the US, right? How they distribute insurance money for food stamps in various US states. So that's about me, Kamnika. From digital crypto assets perspective, I'm pretty new, like Kamnika. You have a very well-versed research done. So to me, onset it looks very risky, as you rightly said. It's not backed by physical gold or something, right? So it's a very dicey area, as you rightly said. It has some key algorithms, how the decentralization of bitcoins and these crypto assets work. So I guess you rightly said, Kamnika, it is an easy target, right? As another financial asset.
Actually, it wasn't an easy target. If you see, this attack was very sophisticated, and if I may, I think anybody who stores anything digitally can be compromised if they're not very secure about the way that they're handling whatever digital assets that they're putting up on anywhere, any storage mechanism. Right. So here also, if you see, the hackers actually planned for at least a month, and it took them 8 days to execute the attack out. So like, for example, what you were mentioning about the entire, at Morgan Stanley, you were at the processing part of the transactions. Now imagine if someone did manage to put in like a malicious payload that corrupted every subsequent transaction that's been processed at your end. So while you have
Right.
processed, you as the maker or the checker of that transaction might have processed a valid transaction at your end, but when it actually hit the system, at the system's level, all of that payload was changed. So this is a very sophisticated. I think it's these kind of hacks have actually happened after a very long while, and it's taken a while for the Lazarus group to get reactivated as well. But yes, it was actually a pretty sophisticated attack, and
No, that's what I communicate said. I mean, not to appreciate the hackers, but still breaking the design
yeah,
and the intricacies, like you rightly said, it cannot happen. They must have studied Wazirex's design perspective very closely, right?
absolutely.
And then planned it out, and as you said, spread it out over a period. And then the last bit was like Robin Hood. Just run
Absolutely.
away, right?
So I feel that Wazirex, because it's one of the smaller across the globe, if you see, Wazirex is probably one of the smaller players when it comes to crypto exchanges. So I really think that the Wazirex attack by the Lazarus group, and the Lazarus group, by the way, has been silent for the last 8 years. So if they are getting activated now, I really think they have something very big planned, and that's what kind of it makes me feel very scared. And that's the reason why I came up with this entire podcast topic, because we all need to know about, you know, the different ways to secure. And all of us are digital nowadays. Everyone does everything digitally nowadays. So we really need to secure ourselves, or at least be armed with information to know how do we protect ourselves from such people. So yeah,
Yeah, I think, Kamnikar, like you rightly said, risk management of crypto assets is even more dicier than the other,
absolutely.
financial assets, because it's relatively new
Yep.
for the last 10 years, right?
Yep.
And we are still evolving.
Absolutely. But thank you so much, Aman, for joining us. And with that, that brings me to a wrap of today's episode. I hope all of you enjoyed, and I will definitely be back again next week. Until then, take care and see you again. Bye.